Hello there everybody, this is Jorge Varela for thebuttonsmasher.com and here's my video review of Fate Extella for PS4 and PS Vita. So just an important note before I even begin the review is that I really don't know anything about the Fate franchise. The only Fate related thing I've exposed myself to is a magical girl spin-off anime called Fate Collide Liner Prisma Ilia, which I like a lot, but I don't think it'll be enough to understand this game fully. Keep that in mind before getting angry over my words in this review, which are generally pretty positive, save for a couple details. So the short version of the review goes like this. It's pretty good, but if you're not a fan of the Fate franchise, everything about it will feel intimidating and incomprehensible. It's a fairly simple story told in the most overly complicated and convoluted way possible. In terms of the actual gameplay, it's just Dynasty Warriors with Fate characters, so if you like that kind of game, then you'll feel right at home. And now the long version of the review goes like this. It has been pretty easy to notice some sort of subgenre being created around the concept of creating a Dynasty Warriors Moso-style game with a variety of different intellectual properties, such as The Legend of Zelda, Fire Emblem, One Piece, and many more. Most of these games are practically identical to their game of origin in both structure and execution. However, it is the brand recognition and name value that truly defines how people will take to the game. If you have never seen the One Piece anime or manga, for example, then you will probably not care or like its video game Musou equivalent at all, rather than a hardcore fan that can recognize every character and call them out by name. Exactly the same thing could be said about Fate Extella, a game that fits exactly this mold, but still tries its best to set itself apart from its peers. Based around the popular franchise, Fate Extella is a musou game with a few RPG elements, featuring recognizable characters destroying oceans of enemies with their power. This is done by experiencing the game's story, which is essentially the anime version of a sci-fi post-apocalyptic narrative with an innumerable amount of references in an attempt to make everything sound more deep and special than it actually is. The story involves a protagonist character that is the winner of a Holy Grail war. Due to a mysterious monster encounter, the protagonist has not only lost his or her memories, but has also been split into 3 parts, creating 3 different stories to follow. Every story essentially involves you and your servants trying to conquer territory for different sides. This is done with the objective to put a powerful ring together that has also been split into 3 parts in order to protect themselves from the Umbral star, a predatory planet that is on a course to destroy everything in its path. What I just told you is possibly the simplest way I can muster to explain the story, for the unfiltered experience is an overly complicated, convoluted, and confusing mess that only hardcore fans of the franchise will understand. It's games like these that make me happy that they come with a database so that I can read up on everything I didn't understand about it. Coming from someone that loves the BlazBlue story and understands it fairly well, I felt pretty intimidated with all the terminology and name dropping found in this game. It also doesn't help that all of the characters talk like aloof badasses that always seem to know everything, while leaving the player completely in the dark with no explanation of what all these different things mean. This story reminds me too much of Nitro Plus Blasters, in the sense that all of it, from the wording to the exposition, could be so much simpler, but it insists in making itself sound like it's some sort of complex story out of Greek mythology, but still keeps some anime tropes for the fans to enjoy, so I don't really know what this game really wants to be. I could spend an entire day trying to make sense out of the story, but I'd rather leave it at just beat up everyone, make the cool ring, stop the apocalypse, because that's essentially what the whole story is, with some romance, fan service, and pseudo-badass dialogue mixed in between. There are even games out there like the Samurai Kagura series, which contain highlighted words within their dialogue boxes, to which then you can click on them and receive some information on what those words actually mean, which always proves useful and convenient in order to understand the game and its world better. Fate Extella, however, doesn't have that at all, which is something that it urgently needed for its story mode, especially when it already has an encyclopedia that explains everything. Just having the highlighted text would skip a couple of steps into knowing all that information. If you pay an enormous amount of attention, you'll eventually get it, and actually enjoy both the dialogue and amazing voice acting. Out of all the Japanese games I've played, this is probably the game whose voice acting I have probably enjoyed the most. I could pretty much spend the whole day listening to all of the female characters speak, especially girls like Nero and Tamamo no Mae. Enjoying the dulcet tones of these characters is a pretty good incentive to get into the initially impenetrable story. However, despite the enormous amount of dialogue on display, this is not the main attraction. Things don't truly get fun until you step into the battlefield and get your hands dirty. The gameplay in this game is exactly as I said before, Dynasty Warriors with Fate characters. However, there are a few elements that make it a little bit more distinctive. One example is a bond level that you can increase by talking to all the characters, which can open slots for upgrades that will definitely help a lot during battle. Another is the variety shown within the battlefield itself. This game is not just hundreds of people standing around waiting to get killed, for they also have ways to hold back your progress. The enemy can unleash invasions, create barriers, lock you into certain sectors, use magic traps, boss characters, and a variety of other things. There are many things that can be used in your favor, just as much as how there are things that can kill you or turn the tables to the enemy's advantage. Most of these are pretty small, but it helps in diversifying the different ways you can button mash your way through a battle. Similar to the story, the tutorials can be initially intimidating, but you'll get the hang of it fairly quickly. For many people, these kinds of games can feel very mindless and boring, but it was the complete opposite for me. I actually found it pretty fun and even stressful at times, in a good way. Constantly having to manage your different territories and making sure that none of them get invaded, while also trying to stay alive, period, can be a fairly big challenge that makes battles last up to 30 minutes to maybe even up to a full hour, which sort of explains why there are only 6 levels in the different story modes. Although I don't mind the levels being on the longer side, I do have a problem with how they actually make them longer. Most of the opposition, like plants, invasions, and taking over neutral territories, feel more like padding to drag out the fight longer, when I feel like pretty much every fight I've been in could have ended at least 20 or 30 minutes ago. But no, the game just had to place another plant on the other side of the map immediately after killing the previous one, filling one of my territories with enemies, to which then I have to go out of my way to reconquer that area again by smacking the same dull, rejected Gundam design robots over and over until they disappear. It's fun, but it can get to the point where you're begging for the whole thing to just be over already. But despite my complaints, I'm sure most of you will be happy with just seeing the characters do cool stuff like in the source material, and it certainly delivers on that front. From transformations to noble phantasms and unlimited blade works, this game pulls out all the stops in terms of cool looking moves. Wanting to see more combos and finishers, create a pretty good incentive to go through the whole story and level everybody up. Initially, you'll just have the main story to play with, but eventually you'll unlock side stories in which everyone gets their time to shine, on top of getting more story dialogue. There is also a free mode in which you can simply fight whoever you want on stage, which is great for killing some time. Overall, Fate Extella was a game that I was afraid of tackling, but it actually became more fun and interesting as I kept playing it. However, you really need to jump an enormous hurdle to be able to feel that way. The confusing story can be unappealing at first, and the gameplay padding can be fairly annoying at times, but eventually you realize how simple and fun the whole thing is. Along with the decent visuals, awesome music, and top-notch voice acting, this is a game that Fate fans will fall in love with almost immediately, but it will take a lot of effort for newcomers to get into it without doing some research or simply paying a lot of attention.